We always begin pretty much in the same way, and that is by having me thank the three sponsors of these evening shows. The first one is this church, the Judson Memorial Church. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the oldest churches in New York City. It is a kind of memorial, if you like, to a whole part of the history of the city of New York. So it's a special kind of place. And I always like to thank them, not only because they provide us with this space, but because the minister here made it clear to us when we started this some time ago that she considers what we do here the second Wednesday of every month to be a consistent and basic part of the mission of this church in the community, which says a lot, if you think about it, about the attitude. So we are not just in a church, we are here, if I can use the term, with the blessings of the people who operate this institution, and we are very grateful. So I like to thank them because they've been very good to us, as they are each time. Those of you who've come before, you know that. The second organization is the Left Forum. The Left Forum is the largest annual collection of left academics and activists in the United States. It'll be meeting in this year, June 1, 2, and 3. It'll take place at the John Jay College of the City University of New York. June 1 is Friday, and it starts that evening, and it goes all through Saturday and Sunday. If you are interested, you can go to leftforum.org and find out all about registering. If you're interested in submitting a panel, you can do all that. It's all explained at the internet site, and I urge you to do it. It's a very, very interesting place. You might be interested to know that the opening plenary Friday evening that kind of gets the conference underway will be addressed by Jane O'Malley Sanders, Bernie Sanders' wife, who is a very key part of his operation and his effort, and she will be the opening speaker. And there will be a whole host of others that I think you will find very interesting. And finally, the third organization is Democracy at Work. That's the organization I work with that does most of the production of these evenings, that arranges for the video taping of this. Brian, who does that work each month, not only tapes it in a masterful way, but puts it up on social media, YouTube and so on, where you can access it. And I want to say a word about that in a moment. But it's the job of Democracy at Work not only to produce these evenings, and also to arrange for me to travel around the United States. Next week, for example, I thought you might be interested to know, I will be going to Virginia. And there I'll be speaking at the invitation of something called the College of William and Mary, which is part of the University of Virginia system. And it is part of the change that has happened in the United States over recent years that makes the kinds of things we do here interesting to everybody. This is not, for those of you who might wonder about it, this is not a New York City phenomena anymore. There may have been a time when this sort of thing happened in New York, but nowhere else. That's not true anymore. I go literally everywhere in the country, and I don't change my tune, I don't alter what I have to say, neither the content nor the tone. So take some comfort in that this is now a part of the national conversation in a way that hasn't been true for half a century in this country. And for me, since I experience it, it's a very heady experience, and I want you to know about it. At least you can hear the story, that that's the reality of today. I do want to make an announcement that the sponsorship that we have talked to you about in previous sessions, that the sponsorship of these events is now available to you in a more practical way. What I normally have done, and I want to be very frank with you about all of this, what I've normally done is said, well, to the audience By the way, some of you have asked me, how many people see this, what we're doing tonight, through the internet, because we put it up there? Okay, good. Can you guess at how many people who are not here tonight will in fact participate and watch this over the next 2 to 3 months?
100,000.
100,000. It is an amazing, for us, it's kind of overwhelming just to get your head around such an idea as that. And when we, as we had to last month, not do it because of my travel plan, I was in California speaking last month, we get a lot of email. You know, where are you? What happened? Is it over? And that's very nice. I mean, you know, we're missed, and it's a very nice feeling. What I also say at this moment, though, is we've asked the folks here to cough up $10 if they can manage it per person to come here, whereas the folks who watch it on the internet, you know, you're on your honor, and so we've made an appeal for people to send us something, since there are expenses to do all of this. It's expensive to produce videotapes of this thing. It's expensive to have them put up on the YouTube. It's expensive to run the operation of responding to people who communicate with us, and on and on and on. So we are very pleased to be able to announce that we are going to be putting this videotape of what we do tonight on a website that some of you may know about, which you have mentioned before, called Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com. If you go to patreon.com/GCLEU, which stands for Global Capitalism, I don't remember what the other letters stand for. LEU.
Economic update.
Yeah, GCL. I don't know why it's GCL. Well, all right, my mistake. But if you go to patreon.com, you will now be able to view this whole event. But we do ask you for a minimal contribution there. It'll be explained if you go there. Just look us up. Which means we now enable you through Patreon to watch the weekly radio television show that we produce at the YouTube studios here in Manhattan, and or this monthly. So both of these things are now available to you. Before, only the weekly radio show was, the radio TV show. So, last thing. We also produce some podcasts. One of them is called Left Out, and the other one is called Puerto Rico Forward. And we would like to ask you to listen to those too. They are available on our website, democracyatwork.info/media. And if you're interested, just go there to our website, democracyatwork.info/media, and you will have access to those websites, to those podcasts, Left Out is a really interesting program of interviewing people doing important work in this country at this time, the kind of work we do, but others. And Puerto Rico Forward is a really superb, historically based analysis of what is probably the worst single crisis now afflicting the United States, and that's on that sad island. What has happened to them consequent on the last 10 years of, I was about to say economic development, but it would be economic opposite of development, coupled with the disastrous storm that you all know about that went through that place. And then now the treatment by the United States government, which is the treatment of a sub-colony. It even makes normal colonialism look good by comparison. It's extraordinary. And we have a really fine young man, a lawyer in Puerto Rico, who prepares and does this with real erudition and a real feeling. And I think you'll find this website and this podcast very, very interesting. Okay. Let me turn then to some of the items that have happened since last we gathered here, and then talk about some of the larger issues that brought us together now. Okay. I don't know really where to start. It's 2 months since we've been here, so there's a lot more than there normally is. So bear with me if I go quickly through some of the earlier ones. I want to start with what happened today, for those of you who missed it. There was a fellow from Goldman Sachs who was the key advisor to Mr. Trump. I don't know exactly how to explain what that means, because nobody can explain what that means. And I'm no better than anybody else at getting. But he's gone. Gary Cohn is gone. He went along with pretty much everything. He got what apparently he was there to get, which was the enormous tax cuts of December. And once those tax cuts were a reality and he had delivered to the financial community a windfall of profits far bigger than they had expected, he seems to have decided now's the time to say goodbye. He said that he disagreed with tariffs. Okay, let me resume. Gary Cohn, leader in the Goldman Sachs firm, made the chief economic advisor of Mr. Trump immediately following his election campaign, where he lambasted Goldman Sachs as being a burden on the country, and particularly went after Hillary Clinton, some of you may remember, because she accepted a very nice payment for, we're really having enormous success tonight, where Hillary Clinton, thank you very much for helping out, Alan. Hillary Clinton had accepted a handsome fee for giving a speech to Goldman Sachs. And I want to remind you that Hillary Clinton's defense, one of the signs that she wasn't a good candidate, was to explain to the public when that was brought out that she was just one of a long line of people who had made such speeches for such amounts of money, and she wondered why she was being singled out. This is, whoever advised her about that one, not a good one, not a good one. Anyway, Mr. Gary Cohn was gone, and he did at least, thank you, Ben, for helping us out with that. Yes. So Larry Cohn is done, and whatever you may think of him, he was a banker who had done a lifetime of doing what bankers at Goldman Sachs do, which can be summarized as the following: taking money from very rich people and moving it into the hands of other very rich people. And then, when you're done, finding a way to take money from other rich people and divide it among people who are also already rich. And you do that over and over again, and by the time you're done, you're one of them, which is probably what you had hoped for all along. And so Mr. Cohn is no doubt happy. But he isn't the advisor of Mr. Trump anymore. Mr. Trump got rid of him in the manner that he has gotten rid of virtually everybody. But what happened today was a successor, a replacement for Mr. Cohn, has been found and hired. And his name is Lawrence Kudlow, Kudlow. I'm just now going to give you a few bits of information so that you all understand the credentials and the quality that got him this extraordinary job as Chief Economic Advisor to the President of the United States. In 1987, Kudlow was rehired by Bear Stearns as its chief economist and senior managing director, 1987. He was fired in 1994 after abuse of cocaine caused him to skip an important client presentation. Kudlow later admitted to a $10,000 a month cocaine habit. $10,000 a month. I mean, I don't know, he bathed in it, perhaps. I don't know. Kudlow also served as an economic counsel to the A.B. Laffer and Associates from San Diego, California, a company owned by Arthur Laffer. He's famous, for those of you who know some economics, for the famous argument and a curve on a graph that he showed that, get ready for this because this is remarkable, the lower the taxes that a government places on businesses and the people, the more taxes it will raise. I'll do that again, because you're wondering whether you heard me right or whether I misspoke. You heard me, I didn't misspeak. The lower the taxes, the more money the government gets. And you know how this magic happens? Like all magic, by sleight of hand. Here's how it works. Lower taxes, this should be familiar to you because you just heard this all of last year. Lower taxes, you see, is going to make companies go crazy with investments because they can get all these profits and pay low taxes. So the lower taxes will make everybody expand, hire more people. And with all those extra people hired and working and earning, they will end up paying more taxes than they did before. So by magic, you lower the taxes and the government gets more money. It is absolutely magnificent. By the way, technically speaking, is that possible? Sure it is. If indeed, when you cut taxes, there's an explosion of activity, you could have this result. But the big if is there has to be an explosion of activity, really stunning one, to make this happen. And the vast majority of times that you cut taxes, that doesn't happen. But Mr. Laffer wanted you to see the possibility, and by repeating it often enough, well, the possibility became a likelihood. And so he was home free. Mr. Kudlow was involved in that stunning effort. He was a member of the board of directors of Empower America, a supply-side economics organization founded in 1993 and merged in 2004 with Citizens for a Sound Economy to form yet another group called Freedom Works. You should listen to the names of these things. Kudlow is also consulting chief economist for American Scandia Life Insurance in Connecticut, a subsidiary of the insurance giant Prudential Financial. So if you think Mr. Cohn leaving means that the big financial powerhouses don't have their man in Washington, don't worry, they do. Okay, little things that you might endear you to him. Kudlow graduated from the University of Rochester in New York with a degree in history in 1969. He was a star on the tennis team and a member of an organization called, you're going to enjoy this, Students for a Democratic Society. Life is complicated. In 1971, Kudlow attended Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. There he studied politics and economics, but he left before completing his master's degree. You ready? We still got a little bit more about Larry Kudlow. By the way, he was known at Rochester to his friends as Cuddles. You cannot make this stuff up. You cannot. Here's the best part. Here we go. In 2005, you may remember back then, people were beginning to get worried about what was then called the housing bubble, the explosion in the prices of housing and the building of housing and so forth. And people were beginning to say this looked like a bubble that was going to burst. So in 2005, here's what Mr. Kudlow was happy to say. Ready? All the, his phrase now, bubbleheads, in quotation marks, looking for a housing price crash in Las Vegas or Florida or in the wider economy, they will be proven wrong. Quote, the Bush boom continues. He's a Republican. The pessimistas are a persistent bunch, he said, mocking them. In other words, he was 100% wrong in terms of everything that happened. He predicted in 2010 that the then Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen would spur higher inflation. It didn't. In 2014, he argued lower oil prices are unambiguously a good thing, even though the Federal Reserve and most economists said there are winners and losers. On tax cuts, in December, he said that Trump's tax overhaul will lead to 3% to 4% growth. It hasn't, and there's no prospect that it will. In 2015, he called for a halt to immigration. changing his earlier position. He said, because of national security concerns. In his words then, quote, seal the borders. Okay. What do we got here? We got a mediocre economist with a bad history of studies and a record of bad predictions that makes even the normal dicey business of prediction look good by comparison. What in the world, other than being a shill for the Republicans and for conservatives, other than that, what he brings to this office is known only to him and likely his mother. But that's the next one. As happens with our presidents, each one makes the one before look really good. So we're going to look at Mr. Cohn, about whom there wasn't much good to say either, but compared to this, whoa. Whoa. Okay. Let's turn to a few other smaller items before we get into the big ones. Also happening in the last few days was a little kerfuffle in Great Britain. Turns out that Mrs. May, the Prime Minister, is having a harder and harder time. She really has come upon a hard time. The polls indicate if there were an election now, she wouldn't be the Prime Minister much longer at all. Even the people in her own Conservative Party have little use for her and say so in increasing numbers. So it's time for something to distract people from her disintegrating situation, and so we have one. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but just as she needed something to distract, it showed up. Here's what it was. An ex-double agent, somebody who worked apparently for both the British government and the Russian government, was poisoned in London. I believe it was London. So, okay. And some efforts were made to study the chemicals or whatever that were used, and it was definitively shown in the way only the governments of modern countries can ever do that, definitively shown where these chemicals came from. They must have come, they had to come, from Russia. And therefore, the British government is outraged that the Russians should meddle in their affairs, which should be familiar to an American audience, since we are outraged. We are outraged that the Russians meddled in our elections. Can you believe that? Here we are, a country that has never meddled in any country. We are subject to a treatment that we would never dream, being deeply committed to the Golden Rule. We would never dream of doing such a thing, and it's done to us despite the cleanliness of our record. And so the British government, with as much British anger as it could muster, British are very polite, quiet people, they don't get angry easily, but they expelled 23 Russian diplomats. This devastating blow to the Russian society means 23 people have to have an airplane ride over the next 48 hours. No sooner was it announced that the government had done this dramatic thing that was a front page news all over Britain, Europe, and in much of the United States, then it was made clear to Mrs. May that she had put her foot in it again. Poor woman. Not that it would be any different if it were a man in doing any of this. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the people who've let her know that this has got to be fixed, this silly noise she's made. It starts with one of the biggest companies in Britain, the British Petroleum. You know them here in this country as BP, the gas station known as BP. You may not know it, but BP is a major owner of the largest gas and oil company in Russia, known as Rosneft. You can see where the problem is going to arise. It's a problem because this company, BP, is part of the British equivalent of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's called the FTSE, FTSE. And it owns a fifth of a company, much of which is owned by the Russian government, therefore under the control of a man named Putin. Which means that if Mr. Putin is angry at whatever it is they're doing, he has a really easy way to express himself. And that is to make difficulties for BP. And BP doesn't want that. And so BP has told Mrs. May, could you please find some other way to do the theater that you politicians require to stay in office? Poor Mrs. May. It turns out that capitalism has woven a network of interconnections in the world that make life harder and harder for politicians. They think they can do one of their traditional moves to shore themselves up, and they go right into a stone wall when they discover that their allies are their enemies, their enemies are their allies, and each of them owns a large portion of the other one. It's very difficult, very difficult. And I want you to be sympathetic to Mrs. May as she goes down with her country. Very sad. Britain is a very sad place. And the reason I want you to understand it is because it's a cautionary tale for us. Britain was once the empire of the world. Right? Britain rules the waves. Or as the detractors like to say, Britain waves the rules. But it usually goes that way. If you rule the waves, you can waive the rules. That's my humor for tonight. Okay. But it's a country that was once, the sun never set on the British Empire, that they were everywhere. And now there's nothing left. And here they are, a small, cold, wet island off the mainland of Europe. That's a long way down. And it's very hard for them, really is, to come to terms with what they once were and were taught about in school and what they are. It may be fun when you're the empire of the world. It's not fun when you were the empire of the world and someone else has replaced you. Now, it might be a little bit comforting, although not much, if the thing that replaced you was once your own colony, US, UK. It'll be more complicated when what replaces you is China. And that's already underway in this country, and that's not going away anytime soon. That's why these stories are important. Another small item to have you think about things in economics that you might not have thought about before. Brussels, which is the seat of the European Union, the unity of the European countries that share the euro and so on, is busy finishing up a new law that's going to be passed in Europe, which is going to provide protection for workers in the gig economy. Workers in the gig economy, sometimes ennobled into workers in the sharing economy. If we had more time, I'd have a moment of silence, sharing being something you learned was good when you were like 3, and your mother explained it to you. The sharing economy. Turns out that the gig and the sharing economies, if you look at them just a little bit below the surface, are mostly about getting workers to work as individual contractors or consultants or independently, so that you don't have to give them benefits of all kinds. What benefits? The benefits that 100 years of labor struggle fought to achieve. Certain hours, certain pay scales, certain holidays, certain medical coverage, pensions, all the rest. So what gig and independence and sharing is all when the dust clears from the, and I'll use a technical term now, bullshit, what you have left is low-paid workers. I don't know how many of you caught it. About a week ago, the New York Times reported on a study that showed that the average income per hour, when you work it all out here in the United States for an Uber and Lyft driver, is about $3 an hour, which is long short of the minimum wage in this country. In Europe, this bill being about to be passed will guarantee protection for workers for what are called their irregular workers, bicycle couriers, Uber drivers, and so on. They will now be guaranteed the same minimal levels of Social Security protection, minimum wage, unemployment benefits, maternity leave. Oh, footnote. In Europe, hold on now, this is going to shock you. In Europe, paid maternity leave is the law. You know that in the United States, it is not. There is no law here. There is a law in virtually every European country, and in many other countries besides. It's not just Europe. We are a pioneer, once again, in getting rid of that sort of thing. They are extending those protections, which now govern most workers in that country, specifically to people on contract or consultancy relationships, so that they are not denied that. And I think for most of you, the important thing here is not the fact that they're doing it, which is interesting enough, but perhaps the fact of why. Why is this happening? And the answer is, in Europe, unlike the United States over the last 50 years, they still have a big, powerful labor movement. And they still have big, powerful socialist parties and communist parties and other left-wing parties. And together, not individually, but together, those parties, whatever their differences, and they have a lot of differences, but they are in favor of all of these sorts of things, and that's too big a part of the population to be ignored. And so it isn't. So while we are busy taking protection away from people, they are pushing. That's no mystery, and it's got nothing to do with drinking wine a lot. It's not about European culture, it's about European politics, and it's something to think about. Next small item, before we get to the big ones, as I say. The University of Michigan's health system, I want to talk to you about briefly. It has been criticized because of a change it made in how it organizes medical care. Okay? And I want to tell you about it because here's a public institution. University of Michigan's a public place, serving the public of which it is an institution. So it's really remarkable, even though what I'm about to tell you is also happening in lots of private medical care facilities, doctors, clinics, hospitals. At the University of Michigan, it is called the Visitors Care Program. Now, if that strikes you as a meaningless phrase, then that's how it struck me too. So I read a little more. And here's what I found out the Victors Care Program. It's even more mysterious than visiting care. I thought it was visiting. I read closer. Victors. Maybe there was a person named Victor. What is the Victors Care Program? It is a program that provides a person who needs health care with, I'm going to read to you now from the statement, personalized service. What the hell is that? Isn't that what the doctor's supposed to give you? Unless when the doctor is working on you, they're actually giving service to somebody else. But it's really important. Personalized service. Number 2, reduced wait times. Reduced, which suggests sort of that the regular wait time is long, because they're going to reduce it. And here we go. Preferential access to physicians. I'm going to do it again. Personalized service, as opposed to impersonalized service, I guess. Reduced wait times, rather than lengthened wait times. And preferential access, as opposed to, I don't know, random access. The program's, this is what you got to understand, the program's annual fee, ready? Now, I want you to understand, this is a fee you pay for personalized service, reduced wait times, and preferential access, whatever the hell that is. Annual fee is, right now, $2,700.
Wow.
What care you get, you pay that fee then, after this. And it's scheduled to go up next year in July, this July, to $3,600 from $2,700. The fee is not covered by insurance and must be paid directly by patients. The university, here comes understatement, perhaps of this century. Here we go. The university's doctors are worried that the program deviates from the institution's public mission. Why am I bringing this to your attention? For the humor of it? In part. I mean, to convey the kinds of things I have to convey often requires humor, otherwise you couldn't stand it. Or at least I can't stand telling you about it unless I mix it up with a little bit of humor. In the profession, this is nowadays called concierge service. It's happening more and more. Some of you may have already been approached by your doctors, or let me put it differently, by people you thought were your doctors, who are telling you that they are, here's a typical story. Hello, this is Dr. Jones, and I'm so happy to talk to you, Mrs. Smith. You've been a wonderful patient here for many years. However, I am reaching the round golden age of 52, and I need to reduce my practice. It is too large. And so I am doing that. And if you would like to continue, which I sure hope you do, you can continue in my practice by joining the concierge service we now offer. $3,000 a year, or you can't come here anymore. Have a really nice day. And you're left with the choice. You want to see this doctor who's been a good friend of yours for umpteen years? Cough it up. And if you don't, or you can't, there's always the emergency room somewhere. And even if they don't have a bed, they have those gurneys out in the hall. And you can lie there until they remember that you're lying there. Okay? This is in a rich country. You live in a very rich country. Massachusetts General Hospital and the Mayo Clinic have already adopted this system. The Michigan University said, we're not the first. Interesting defense. What do you mean I murdered somebody? I'm not the first person to murder somebody. Okay. All right. Okay. Some more. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, canceled a merger that was underway or about to be done. Many of you may have noticed it, but you probably didn't read up on it. A company that is in the business of making computer chips, which I believe is a very important part of our economy, chip maker. Company based in Singapore named Broadcom, offered to buy the leading American chip maker, Qualcomm. Got to learn these kinds of words. It was a small deal. The purchase price was $117 billion, making it one of the biggest mergers ever in the history of the world. As is normal in these sorts of things, it was being scrutinized, this offer, by something called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. If you're not familiar with that, that's because of how you live and what you pay attention to and what you're taught. It is a committee that reviews all of such deals and can decide whether or not the deal should be allowed to go through. It's one of those cases where the government intervenes in the economy, but no, or almost no, right-wing commentator ever seems to think there's any problem with the government intervening in this sort of thing. So they were considering this thing, and they had actually asked some questions. They were concerned because the Pentagon buys a lot of chips, computer chips, buys them from Qualcomm, and if Qualcomm was taken over by Broadcom, you would have to give security clearance to a foreign company. At this point, if we had more time, I would stop and gasp at the thought of a foreign company being able to get security clearance to do something. I'm hoping you're aware that there's loads of examples of that all the time. This is theater. But that's not the important thing. During the discussions that are ongoing now by this committee, whose job it is to do it, Mr. Trump simply announced the deal is off. He will not allow, music, he will not allow the national security, just getting exciting, to be compromised by this foreign Singapore-based. Singapore is an ally of the United States. Oh, detail. It's foreign. Keep that in mind. Foreign. That's a really sophisticated topic. Foreign, right? It could be foreign, and he explained his reasoning. Or rather, his assistants did. He didn't explain anything. He just announced that he was protecting us from an invasion of our national security. Okay, here it goes. Here's the explanation. Broadcom, it turns out, is an enthusiastic cost cutter. That cost cutter, what that means is they lay off a lot of people and they make the remaining people work harder to make up for the people they fired. But to say we fire people to make those who remain work harder, that doesn't sound good. Cost cutter is kind of neutral and makes a certain sense. If Broadcom undertook cost cutting, that might include, notice the word might, it might include slashing Qualcomm's R&D spending. So follow me? Broadcom is going to buy Qualcomm, and being famous as a cost cutter might decide to cut the research and development spending of the company it's buying, Qualcomm. If that happened, notice the if, it could put Qualcomm at a disadvantage in the race to offer next generation wireless. And that would diminish Qualcomm's influence in setting standards. If all that happens, ready now? If the deal goes through, and if they cut the research and development, and if that would lead to falling down in the race with other companies, that might give a leg up to Qualcomm's top competitor, the Huawei, I don't know how to pronounce it, Huawei, Huawei Technologies Company, which, here's a phrase you want to call it, has ties to the Chinese government. Every corporation in China has ties to the Chinese government, just like every major American corporation has ties to this government. What in the world does any of this mean? It means that they have no rationale for what they're doing. It makes no sense. Four, 5 ifs. You're going to prevent a major merger on 5 ifs? Nobody who ever follows this pays, this is silly. This is not worth the paper. So what's going on? Well, you're forced, in a sense, if you know enough, to ask the question. And the answer should jump out at you right away. Mr. Trump is in trouble politically. For those of you who noticed the results of that little election in Pennsylvania, you could see the hand. It's not a question of who wins in the end. it's supposed to be a safe Republican place, and it clearly isn't anymore, and there's no 12 ways to figure out what that's about. Mr. Trump is in trouble, and he needs theater. Why does he need theater? Because he cannot do what he promised. It's not even that he isn't wanting to do it. He may in fact want to do it. He may in fact be trying to do it, I don't know. But he can't do it. He can't bring back coal. That's not available. He can't prevent American companies from going to where the profits are higher and the wages are lower. He can't really prevent any of the automation that is the major reason Americans haven't got jobs, not immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. He can't. And so he has to do something else. He has to appear to be doing. You all saw this in the campaign. He had to go, remember, to Indiana, to the air conditioning factory there, and in the end, we're talking about 300 workers, which is silly. It doesn't deal with the problem. But it's good theater. It's good PR. It's good sound bites. Good TV. That's what this is. So you stopped a $117 billion merger, and it's all about the theater. So that when you actually ask exactly why are you doing this? Why did you interrupt the committee that's supposed to look at this? And the answer is if we would be in trouble. That never happened. That's silly. This is not a silly government. So if a government that isn't silly, and it isn't, does silly things, you really do have to ask yourself the question, what is going on? And I think that is a good segue into, well, one more short thing, and into the major topics for tonight. The new budget that's being considered by the Congress, proposed by Mr. Trump last month, contains increases for the Defense Department, big ones. The total spending on defense is scheduled to be about $700 billion in this year, 2018, and $716 billion next year, 2019. This represents an increase of about $100 billion over what it was before. That in itself is staggering. I have reported to you in past monthly meetings a fact which I will repeat to you now. The United States already spends more on defense than the next 10 countries in the world combined. Do you understand? We are already far and away. I'm talking as a percentage of our GDP, as a percentage of the government budget, and all the rest. Nobody's close to us. Number two is China, way less than the United States, and everybody else even lower. If you take the top 10, 8 of them are allies of the United States whose military work together with us. So if you add them, which you should, then it's even crazier, the predominance. Now keep that in mind when I tell you, which you already know, that in December, the government cut dramatically the taxes on corporations, on wealthy people, and on everybody else. Okay. You don't need an advanced degree in economics, which I wouldn't recommend anyway, but you don't need it. You don't need, I have one, I can show you. It's on the wall. But you don't need an advanced degree to understand that if the government cuts the taxes that come in, and at the same time boosts the spending, particularly of its number one expenditure, defense, a lot, that there's going to be, ready, a problem. Because the money coming in, you just cut. Right? In December, the tax on corporate profits was cut by 40%. It was a windfall gift to the corporate sector in this country, the likes of which we haven't seen for a long time. A 40% cut overnight. And what was asked of the corporate sector in return? What was asked? Nothing. You could have made it conditional. We'll give you a cut, but you have to take 50% of what you save in taxes and show that you've made an investment and created jobs. You know that thing you claim you do all the time, creating jobs? Well, we're going to hold you to it. You're going to get the cut, but you have to create jobs. We didn't do that. All we needed from these corporations was the statement, we're seriously interested in considering the possibility, if the weather holds up, that we will hire people. That was it. And I made that up. No one required even that statement. I just made that up. Nothing was required. Okay, let's follow the logic. You cut the government's revenue dramatically by hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, and you spend more, particularly on defense. One of two things has to happen. Number one, which you've heard about. If you take in less money and you spend more, the difference is called the deficit. So here we have, which we've talked about, this wonderful spectacle that here in the United States, the Republican Party, which has been telling us for at least 50 years that deficits are a terrible thing, you should never do them, we have to get rid of them, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible, have just boomed them up. Well, interesting. You know, people change their mind. So we're going to have a big deficit. Well, what does that mean? If the government takes in less and spends more, where does it get the more? It borrows. Well, it can't quite. It has to borrow. Legally, it has to go and borrow that money. It has to go and borrow it, which means the government enters the world of borrowing as a big fat borrower. Now, other things equal, if the government suddenly wants to borrow more, what do you think is going to happen to the interest rates in our country? What would you guess? The government has to borrow a lot. Interest rates are going to go up because, you know, we're all borrowing for our house or our car or our mortgage or, you know, whatever, and suddenly there's a big new borrower competing with us. It's going to drive up interest rates. Of course, it wouldn't have to. This is just a lesson in economics, folks. It wouldn't have to drive up interest rates because you could have an arrangement where the government wants to borrow more, but cleverly comes up with a way of pumping more money into the economy, in which case the government borrows more of the money it prints more of. This is fun. Imagine if you could do that. Imagine if you needed to spend more than your income, so you borrowed from yourself and did it. The government is in a position to do that. And the government can do it, but the cost of doing that is to flood the economy with lots of more money. And that's okay, so long as that money doesn't start running after things, land, buildings, paintings, diamonds, gold, good old wine, who knows? If that money that is being pumped up to solve this problem starts running after goods, it'll produce an inflation. Everything will get very much more expensive, and you won't be able to afford underpants, which might be a problem, depending, of course, on your attitude toward underpants. So the government may often decide not to get into this difficult quagmire, and if you're a Republican, here's what you prefer. If the government has less money, and we're spending all this extra on defense, a way to avoid having to borrow a lot and print the money and all that is to spend less on other things. That way, even though we have less money coming in and we're giving more to the defense, we don't have to borrow anything because we've cut back on everything else. And in this economy and in our society, everything else has a name. It's called Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's what's shaping up now. The fight between those people who want to impose on all of us a deficit, a borrowing, an expansion of the money supply, again, with all the risks that entails, versus the other group who wants to cut all the social programs the government provides to everybody. Hospitals, loans to students, you name it. And we, being in a democratic country, are free to choose which of those two burdens we prefer to carry. If you accept this, you're crazy. This is the equivalent of my coming up to you and saying, I am about to give you a free choice. I will either stab you or choke you to death. It's entirely your choice. You are free to make a... Your reaction would be, I hope, since you're not crazy, I don't accept the choice. It's not an acceptable either or. But why do you accept? The government is about to saddle you with an immense deficit, on top of the deficit we already have, or the collapse of your social programs, when you're already far behind the Europeans, as I've told you. Those are your choices. That's what the debate in Congress is about to become, because we live at a time when this society is falling apart, and you're living through it. But let me turn then to the big topics for today, which are on that last point. First, the junior big topics. Something extraordinary happened in West Virginia. For those of you that are interested in the American labor movement and in American culture and society, what just happened in West Virginia is absolutely crucial for everyone to understand. I'm not here to tell you that everything that the people there did was brilliant and was successful. I'm not interested in making them saints, and I'm not interested in making them sinners. I'm interested in what's historically significant about what happened there. West Virginia is a backward state in terms of labor law. You are forbidden by law, if you're a public employee, to bargain collectively over anything. You are therefore, in effect, forbidden from having a union. You cannot have a union. So, for example, public school teachers can't have a union the way they can, say, in New York, because it's illegal. You can't have a union do what unions do. This has something to do with the fact that the teachers in West Virginia, I believe, are the third or fourth poorest paid public school teachers out of the 50 states. The state, in case you're interested, the state that pays its teachers the worst is Oklahoma. That's the absolute worst. And when I finish telling you about West Virginia, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's coming down the road in Oklahoma, which is West Virginia again. So that's what's coming, but what we've had is West Virginia. So there basically are, the unions are there. You can join the union, but you can't function as a union. So the unions there have effectively no power at all. They're there, they make noise, they make statements, but they can't bargain with the state. They can't negotiate wages or working conditions. They can't function. So now the teachers are horrified. Why? First, they're terribly badly paid. And second, in recent years, the state has effectively lowered their salary, way below what it already is, by requiring them to pay a larger and larger portion of their medical insurance premiums. So if you add a wage that's nothing with rising cost of medical, you can see they're basically being cut year after year. West Virginia is a state that, no matter what else you think, you know those people need a quality education as much or more than any place in the United States. West Virginia is one of the most poor, underdeveloped, it's like Mississippi or New Mexico. It's in that kind of state, in real trouble. So it's not the place where a rational decision would be to pay teachers very poorly and to keep. What of course happens is if you're a teacher in West Virginia and you can any way possible get out of there, you go somewhere else. You go to a state that pays more. So then, given all this, here's the remarkable reality, okay? Thank you. The remarkable reality is the state of West Virginia has 55 counties. It's divided up like all states into counties, has 55 counties. The teachers, without a union, but with an accumulated years of anger and rage and resentment at how they're taught, the disregard for the quality of education you're providing to the young people of that state, scrimping on support for the teachers, scrimping on medical so they're not sick, they can go to a doctor if they get, and all the rest of the disgusting way this state handles its public schools. They've had it, and they decide to organize a strike, which is not legal, and having no union. And they did. And they did it in every single one of the 55 counties, who struck on the same day with the same set of demands. And when the state legislature said, we won't bargain with you, they kept the strike going. They forced the state to bargain. Then the state said, we'll give you 4%, not the 5% they'd asked. They said, we're not going back. And they held all 55 counties. Any union in this country that's honest would tell you that they would be very proud if they had pulled such a thing off. 100%, every county, solid down the line, nobody broke, nobody went back to work, nobody was intimidated. Wow. They won what they asked for. They got their 5%, and it was no increase, with no increase in their medical thing. Is that enough? No. Does it overcome their bad position? No. But it is an amazing victory, which reminds us, or should, that in the end, what makes a union strong is that attitude, that courage, that solidarity of those workers who finally had enough. And what it suggests and what it shows is possible ought to be something everybody thinks about. Final point. Oklahoma is the worst state of the union in terms of teacher pay. The joke among public school teachers in Oklahoma is the most important thing you do each year that you teach in Oklahoma is keep an eye out for the vacancies in Texas, which is next door. Because Texas pays reasonably well, so you go right across the border from Oklahoma, you're in Texas, and you get paid properly. They're organizing, and they're model. They say this, so it's not me. They say, we are going to do, our goal is to do here what they did in West Virginia. So not only is it an enormous achievement, it's very important that this story be, which is what I'm telling you, really important. And if you didn't see it in your newspaper or your television or your radio, well, it's another comment on the quality of the reporting that you live with. Second, equally important in its way. In Canada, as you know, they have a public health system. So the salaries of doctors are paid for by the states, the provinces they're called there. So something remarkable happened in Quebec over the last few weeks. The state came in and did something very important. It raised the salaries by a modest 2% of what are called specialists. We would call that here the most highly paid doctors. The average salary of a medical specialist in Quebec is about $400,000 a year. So you're talking about the people paid at the top of the scale. They got an increase. There are about 10,000 of these folks, if I get the numbers right. 700, which is a modest portion, 700 of them banded together, formed an organization, and rejected the increase. We don't want it. We will not accept it. We're giving the money back to the state of Quebec because we cannot stand what's going on. What's going on is that the government, not wanting to pay the mass of people that provide health care, the nurses, the orderlies, and all the functionaries that make a hospital or a medical system work, what they're doing, this is said by them, is they're paying off modestly those at the top in order to split them from the rest of the workers and in fact pay them to keep the lid on the rest of the workers. It's cheaper to give the top some than to give everybody what might be fair, so it's a cost-cutting initiative, and it widens, of course, the inequality among working people, and it damages, as these 700 doctors said, it damages the health care that we provide. In the end, we can't do our jobs as specialists because the rest of the system is dysfunctional. Okay? What an interesting idea that people already very well paid should have the idea that solidarity in terms of doing the job they're supposed to do with those below them in the pecking order is a more important value than getting another 1.4 or 2%, whatever it is they got from the state. And they embarrassed the entire administrative leadership of the Quebec province because they caught them right out there red-handed doing what they do. And the reason I'm telling you this is not about Quebec and about doctors. It's about this is a procedure you should recognize because it's all around you. I'm an academic. It has become normal in academic circles. You pay a tiny number of administrators at the top of every university a fortune of money. the deans, the provosts, the chancellors, all those people with the fancy titles. And their job is to keep the lid on everybody else, because that's much cheaper than giving the average teacher, the average teaching assistant, the average professor the kind of salary increase that they would normally get, especially at a time like this. You won't do that. So you buy off the people at the top of the pyramid so they can operate as a lid down on those below them. This has been going on a long time. It's very popular in the United States now. And the reason that story in Quebec is so important is because it's a pushback. So my hat's off to the 700 doctors who had the nerve to do this in Quebec, as it is to the public school teachers in the 55 counties of West Virginia. Last little one, the gun industry. I don't know how many of you, I passed today in New York City, 2 demonstrations of school kids protesting gun violence, one outside of a church on Fifth Avenue, and I forget where the other one was. So I wanted, because a number of you have asked me, I wanted to say a few words about the gun industry. By the gun industry, I mean the people who make the guns, the rifles, the pistols, and all the rest of it. They have the same problem all capitalist industries do. In order to be profitable, you have to hire workers at a low enough wage to produce a commodity at a high enough price, and you have to get enough people to buy the commodity at that price while you're paying workers that to pull the profit out of it, which is what they're in the business to do. Okay, so focus on the last step of what I just told you. You've got to sell the guns. You've got to sell the guns. How do you do that? How do you get people to accumulate? For those of you who don't know it, the average gun owner in the United States, I believe, has a dozen of them. It's only a crazy number. You have to get people to think they want and need a gun, or maybe better, 10. One in each room. One in the back of the toilet. Who knows? How do you do that? It's the problem for all capitalist enterprises. They have to get you to buy the stuff. How are they going to do it? Well, you all know that. The soap company gets you to do that by suggesting that they have added to the soap that cleans you a wonderful aroma, a perfume, in fact, so that when you wash yourself, this perfume lingers on afterwards and makes all of the people you're attracted to intensely interested in sex with you immediately. And this is, well, you all giggle.
It works.
You giggle, no, but you giggle because you understand that that's nonsense. That they just want the money out of your wallet to get you to buy the damn soap, which you'll put in the bathtub and use in the way you've used soap all your life. How do they get? They get you to buy something else. Sexual attractiveness. This soap is not only able to clean you, but it'll do all these other things, right? How do the gun people solve that problem? They have the same issue. The gun, like the soap, it does something. You pull the trigger, it makes a loud noise, and a small piece of metal goes someplace. This is not all that exciting. It's like soap. Can you do something more? Can you suggest to people, just like in the soap example, that if they buy the soap, they will get sexual attractiveness through the lovely aroma? Can they buy the gun and get manliness, power, independence, strength? If you could do that, if you have a gun and people who might normally punch you right in the nose will hesitate to do that. Well, come on. That makes exactly as much sense as use this soap and people will fall over clutching their clothes away from their bodies. You know that's nonsense. So in order to make that really work, the gun people had to invent an institution that would go around and tell you 800 creative ways that having a gun makes you more of a man, makes you more independent of a government that might take away your rights, that might compromise your independence. You have a gun, or 2, or 6, or 12. There is such an institution, isn't there? It's called the NRA. And its job is to function as a way to get you to associate with a gun a whole bunch of things that are silly. The gun doesn't make you independent of anything. The gun doesn't make you a larger man than you were before. But if you can make the case, and if you have people who are very worried, you know, that, like with the soap example, if you're really worried about how sexually attractive you are, you're vulnerable to being told, look what this soap can do that you've been unable to do any other way. Well, here, you haven't been able to be much of a man. Not in this culture. You lost your job, you're not paid very well, your wife has to go out and work, which you thought you wouldn't have to need her to do. You are feeling inadequate, you are feeling too little, you are feeling unfree, you are feeling hemmed in, and now you have a AR-15 rifle that can kill 47 people in 12 seconds. Wow, are you powerful? That's what this is. It's a brilliant campaign, very successful, to associate with this object you buy a whole host of wonderful, imaginary benefits. It's sad, more than anything else. Okay. I've told you about the cut taxes. I want to turn to 2 other things, and the whole point is to show you again the theater of Donald Trump and the theater of the American government, and to show you that it is the confluence of something happening to American capitalism on the one hand and something required of Mr. Trump on the other. So he cut taxes in December, and he has spent the whole last year throwing people out of the country, immigrants who he can find some reason to expel, to deport home. And the most recent thing since last we met, imposing tariffs. You know, the 25% tariff on steel, the 10% tariff on aluminum, and the threat over the last 2 or 3 days of a vast increase in tariffs specifically targeting China. What is this about? Well, let's do first the capitalism problem and then the Donald Trump problem. You see how these things come together. First, the capitalism problem. Well, this goes back to what I told you about Britain. There is no way for me to say this politely, so I'm going to say it bluntly. The dominance of American capitalism in the world economy is over. It's been over for a while. It's accelerating. This is very difficult, and so it is not surprising that the majority of Americans basically respond to this situation by denying it's going on. That's what the British did, and that's what we're doing. And much of what we do, including this enormous expansion of the defense spending, is the behavior of a society that is losing its political, economic, and cultural dominance and is holding on to the only area where it can still exercise some dominance, even if it's symbolic, by having all the bombers and all the rockets and all the ships and all the rest of the game. It can't. We can't. The Europeans are nipping at our feet. The Chinese are outdoing every expectation, including their own, as to how fast they would grow and how quickly they would become a powerhouse. The United States is not prepared to fight wars forever. It is now the only country on earth that has its troops in 50 to 100 other countries at the same time. Every empire in the history of the world collapsed when it overreached, it's called. When it tried to control the world, to hold on to the dominance it once had. And in the end, it fell apart because it can't afford it. It can't afford it. It can't afford to be active in every African country. And the ability to tell the rest of the world that you are a rogue state, there's only one country in the world that literally threatens everybody. And that's this one. And there's no way you can pretend till you're blue in the face. That's the reality. This is the country that can send bombers, and does, and rockets and ships and black ops and rangers and SEALs and all the rest of it perfectly freely around the world. This is the country of which others are afraid, and for good reason. Then no other country does this. No other country can. No other country can afford it, neither politically nor economically. And we probably can't either, but we are determined to try. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. It means that there's not the investment in whatever might make this economic system last a good bit longer. Heavy investment in technological change, heavy investment in developing the skills and inventiveness of our own people by investing in education, not divesting from education, and so on. We're not doing those things. And so the reality is we're not solving the problem. Defense is a use of your creativity for something that sits in a silo until it rusts or gets shot into the middle of a desert someplace, killing 11 people who were having a wedding. What is this? Here's the problem that's so important. Mr. Trump faces a capitalism that is heading down. He is both the product of that, the anger of the American people built up over 20, 30 years, anger with the Bush promises that went nowhere, then angry with the Democratic Obama promises that likewise went nowhere. They voted for Trump because he's better than more of the same. That's why the British voted to leave Europe. Was it the solution to their problem? Of course not. But they were so angry at the elite that had brought them where they were that when the elite said you must stay in Europe, they gave the elite the finger and voted against them. 2 weeks ago, while we were in our interregnum, there was an election in Italy. For those of you who paid attention, same thing. The traditional parties, out. And the new ones, the critical ones, the ones whose only political message is, we're not like them. Vote for us, we're new, we're different, we're fresh. And you have the same thing in Germany. Germany used to be governed by two parties like we did, Republican and Democrat, only there it's called Socialist and Christian Democratic. They used to get 3/4, 4/5 of the vote. They can't even get a majority now. They barely have a majority with the two of them together. It's called a coalition government in which the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, together with their Bavarian partner, and the Socialists, together have a bare majority. They're on the edge of extinction, particularly the Socialist Party is disappearing. And the catchword, for those of you that don't pay attention, the catchword to describe all of these people saying no more of this old dead capitalism are called populists. Weird language. Populist means of the people. What exactly does that mean? The old is dying everywhere. And to think that that isn't happening here would mean you'd have to explain why the United States is fundamentally different from the others, which it isn't. So it is happening here. That's what Trump is. Trump is an angry working class saying, screw you, Bushes and Clintons and all of that. We're going with this weird guy. How much worse can he be? Well, we're learning. How much worse can he be? But the truth of it is, he's stuck in the same system as the other ones were. He's no big difference. He's really more of the right-wing republicanism. It's Bush, a little heavier. Or Bush is Trump light. And that's not going to solve anything. He's not solving anything. And the more he can't deliver the jobs, the incomes, everything he promised, the more he has to do theater. He has to substitute symbolism. He has to substitute symbolism for reality because he can't fix the reality. That's not within his power. It's not even his fault. He couldn't if he wanted to, and he probably doesn't want to. So here's the theater. Act as if you're making a change and blame the failure for things to change on a conventional, plausible scapegoat. And the most plausible scapegoat in all these societies has always been the foreigner, the other. So here we go. Immigrants are foreigners. See, they came here, but they belong there. They're foreigners, and if we just get rid of them, we'll solve our problems. Notice, the bad guy is the foreigner. Jump now 2 weeks ago. The bad guy is the foreign trader, which is why we have to punish them with a tariff. If you're a foreigner bringing goods in here, we're going to make you pay 25% tax if you're bringing steel and 10% tax if you're bringing aluminum. We're punishing, and if you listen to Trump, and they cheat. The United States said, like a kid who's 11 years old on the playground, having just lost his last flipping card, getting angry at Peter over there because Peter cheated. If you know anything about international trade, you'll know it's an exercise in cheating. Everybody's cheating. They always have cheated. The trick is, how do you cheat? And everybody cheats, and this is silly. It's like being angry at foreigners because they breathe. But it's a foreigner. It's the bad other that's holding us back. Listen to Trump. These are bad deals we made with them. They're holding us back. We could be, we would be, we can be, and I am the president who sticks it to the foreigner so we can expand it. He's got the blame. He knows who the bad guy is. Meanwhile, he is the chief. He's really doing things. He's sticking it to them. His predecessors, Obama and Bush, they were pushovers. They made bad deals. Nobody in their right mind believes. The same people, by the way, who actually write the deals in the world are doing it now as they were doing it before. These are career civil servants. They don't change. People at the top do, but the people who do all the work don't. It's all silly, but it's very, very powerful. It's the attempt of a society in denial to avoid having to confront where they are and what it means. Last point. Why is it important for Mr. Trump to be doing this? Here's the answer. Mr. Trump becomes president without a base of support. The bulk of the Republicans are what they've always been. Bush, and whatever the other names were. And the Democrats are Clinton, and the dark Clinton, Mr. Obama. Okay, that. Mr. Trump didn't have either of these. So Mr. Trump, if he wins the election, which, believe me, surprised him as much as it did all the rest of us, he basically has said so. Not that that means anything, but he said so. So imagine yourself a president who wins without winning. He has no base. His survival depends on getting a base. He's got to make parts of this society who didn't give a damn about him become attached to him, support him, are excited about him. And that's what he's done from day one. First thing he did was up the defense spending. That's smart. That means the military, who could bounce him out of there in 10 minutes, are not going to do it, because he's giving them more. If you look at the budget, he gave them more than they requested. So he's a friend of the military. The next thing done, he had promised everybody he would get rid of Obamacare. He couldn't do it. Okay, once that was defeated, he went and he gave to the capitalist class, the employer class, the biggest tax cut on their profits they'd ever seen in 1 year. That made them his allies in a way they weren't before. Here's what the Republican campaign will be for the next 2 years. Whatever you see in the paper, here's the real campaign. Don't vote against Trump, because if you do, he will bring back the taxes to what they were, the Democrat, before Mr. Trump. So you, Mr. Businessman, and you, Mrs. Businessman, you better understand that the profits you're earning now with the low taxes, those are going to disappear if you vote for the Democrats. And whatever else, you understand? The Democrats will undo what the Republicans did. That'll be a devastatingly powerful message to give across. That's why he has to waffle on the NRA. He needs the base. That's why he has to endorse white supremacists. The man has no support. And of course, he doesn't care about the long-term effects of a tariff. So sad. You watch the New York Times. Tariffs sometimes have these kinds of effects. That's not what this is about. This has got nothing. He could care less. He doesn't know. His advisors tell him one thing or the other. He gets deaf. It's not interesting to him. These tariffs have an important effect. If they go through the way they have, every steel company in this country is for Mr. Trump. He doesn't mind that the other companies, like the car companies that buy steel, will have to pay higher price. He didn't have them anyway. Car companies don't like him, never did. They're grateful to Mr. Obama because he bailed them out in 2008 with vast amounts of our money. They don't need him. He knows that. He's got to find allies. And tariffs split the capitalist class. Those who benefit from having the protection will be his supporters. And those who don't, he didn't have them anyway, because this is just good politics. What the long-term effects are irrelevant to him. And that's perhaps the worst piece of information for you all to digest. You are living in a society whose political structure enables a person to pursue this need to stay in power, no matter what the consequences, at a time when this society is in desperate need of a change of direction, or else it's going down. And it's taken all of us with it. We have very little time. There's 2 questions I'll try very quickly to answer, okay? What do you see socialism doing for the rest of our lives? Ooh, it's an easy question. All right. Very quickly, because we have run out of time. Socialism deserves an evening, and over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll pick one and we'll spend an evening dealing with it. Let me leave you with almost like a teaser about that, and you'll come back and hear me out. Socialism in its first 150 years, roughly 1850 to the end of the last century, 2000, defined itself in terms of the economy as a whole. The basic idea was capitalism was a system characterized by private ownership of the means of production, right, and markets. Ownership by private individuals of the factories and the offices and all that, and the distribution of resources and products by means of a market. I give you 6 of these, you give me 4 of those, right? Keep that in your head. Socialism was considered to be the alternative, not private ownership of the means of production, but the government. The government would come in and own and operate the factories, the stores, and the offices, and do it for all of us as a people, rather than for the benefit of the few who own it. So socialism was the government coming in and also doing away with markets, and the reason was very simple. A market is a way of distribution that favors the rich. You all do understand that, even if it gets muddy in your head sometimes. You do understand, because you know when you go in the mall, the fatter your wallet, the more fun you're going to have in the mall. And the thinner your wallet, the more you'll be sad looking at the windows where you can't buy. The market distributes to the people who have the most. It doesn't ask how you got it. It doesn't ask whether you deserve it the most. It just asks, have you got the money? You get it. And if you don't have the money, get out of here. For those of you that think you have ethics and morals, try to square that with a market. So the socialists always said, and they had an easy time, particularly with the religious Christians. You know, the Bible, you have all got to be socialists. Norman Thomas, the leader of American socialism for most of the 20th century, was a Protestant minister, as were many, because it was the clearest thing for them. So socialism was the government owns and operates the enterprises and plans the distribution according to people's needs. If you're a child, you get milk. Whether or not you have money isn't the issue. You get the milk because you're a child. That was socialism. And when revolutions happened, when the socialists went the next step beyond criticizing private ownership of the means of production and criticizing markets, when they took the next step and became not critics, but administrators of a society they were in charge of, what they did was what you would figure. They had the government take over the businesses, and they had the government plan the distribution rather than having markets. The problem with this arrangement was not that it didn't get economic growth. That was an achievement of socialism. And no matter what you think about socialism, making believe what I just said isn't the case is not going to advance your argument. The two fastest growing economies in the last 100 years have been first the Soviet Union and second the People's Republic of China. That ought to give you some idea. If economic growth is what you want and need, if becoming no longer poor but now wealthy as a country, if that's your number one goal, then you ought to be the kind of socialist they had then, because that's what they've done. First in Russia, then in China. The problem is they didn't here comes the punchline. They didn't transform something. They left something untransformed when they made their changes, the socialists. They left the organization of production inside the enterprise pretty much unchanged. The mass of workers came to work 9 to 5 every day, 5 days of the week. True, it wasn't a board of directors elected by shareholders who told them what to do. It was a group of government officials sent there by the political party or the government who told them what to do. But being told what to do is what they were continuing to have from before. The revolution didn't change that. And that's very dangerous, because what happened to socialism in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in Cuba, in Vietnam, and in China was that the unchanged structure of production undid the changes they did achieve at the top. In the end, they couldn't survive. And the property went back into private hands, Russia, Eastern Europe, and the market resumed the entity, the institution of distribution. The planning apparatus atrophied and died. Therefore, in the 21st century, socialists who don't disappear because their way of proceeding turns out not to have worked real well, socialists have turned around in the last 50 years and asked the question, what did we do wrong? What was the mistake? Why did the Soviet Union implode on itself? Why does China function the way it does? And they've been busy, these socialists. There's lots of them, in case you're not aware. And they've come up with some really good ideas about what went wrong. Of course, as an American, you wouldn't know, because we've had a taboo on everything about socialism for 50 years. We have no idea what their self-criticism was. We have no idea where it led, what insights they have, what new developments, what new definition of socialism they produce. So let me fill you in as the conclusion for today. They decided that their big mistake was not to have transformed the workplace, not to have transformed the inside of the factory, the office, the store, to have changed the big picture, what in economics is called macroeconomics, the big picture, but not having changed the base. That the mistake they made was not to understand that the term socialism has to include not just the government taking over, not just planning instead of markets, but to make it work properly, you have to give the people the power at the base of society to make sure that works for them. Otherwise, you make it work for the elite that run the government, which is what we saw happen. So what's the solution? Socialism in the 21st century has a different meaning. It's not that it isn't state ownership and state planning. It can have that, but that's not the primary issue. The primary issue is the base. And the base means to transform the workplace from the hierarchical, authoritarian, tiny group of people at the top, whether they be privately elected by the shareholders or put there by a government apparatus. That's got to go. What there has to be is the mass of people democratically together own and operate and make all the decisions, enterprise by enterprise, factory, office, store. That way, you finally put the people in charge. You cannot have a government by, of, and for the people if you do not have an economic system by, of, and for the people. This country tried to have political democracy without ever having economic democracy, and that's as big a failure as macro transforming capitalism into socialism, but leaving the base unchanged. Socialism, therefore, is leaving the prioritization of the macro and shifting, not against those old ideas, but something has to be added. The key addition is to transform the workplace. Or to use the language you sometimes hear me use, worker cooperatives is the organization you have to move towards, because it is the solution, not just to the injustices and inequalities of capitalism, but it's also the solution to the failures of the earlier phase of socialism. Don't be upset by this. No system comes into the world the first time all fully worked out with all the details, all the T's, crossed and the I's dotted. Capitalism tried 10 different ways of emerging out of feudalism before it figured it out. Socialism has to try several before it figures out how to get out and beyond capitalism. We've just lived through a major first effort, Russia, China, and all of that, and we're about to launch now on the second one. And the second one will have learned from the first, which is as it should be. Okay, folks, we've outlasted our time. I can see from your faces that you too are a little tired. I hope it hasn't been either too much, too long, or too depressing. I don't mean it to be depressing, because if you understand what's going on, that's the best chance we all have of getting out of here with our skins. And I don't mean this building, I mean the system that we are in as it goes down. I hope I see you again in the future. Thank you for coming.